This month is Diabetes Month, and today we are discussing cultural eating and diabetes care. Canada is one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world, with over 450 ethnic or cultural groups represented across the country. When we look specifically at where we are, which is in Alberta, and according to the 2021 census, we see incredible diversity here as well. So 7.1% South Asian, 5.2% Filipino, 4.3% Black, 3.5% First Nations, 3.1% Métis, along with 3.9% Chinese, 1.7% Arab, 1.6% Latino, and 1.3% Southeast Asian. And we're talking about this because there's a really important reality when we talk about diversity, particularly in South Asian, Indigenous, and Black populations that actually have higher rates of diabetes and diabetes-related chronic conditions. So when we're talking about food, this means that cultural, traditional foods, this has to be in conversation when we're talking about diabetes management plans as well as eating. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to jump right into Roshni, who's a CDE. And Roshni, why are we talking about this today? Why does this matter? What are we wanting our listeners to know today?
I think this is a super important conversation and something that I feel very honored to speak about today in the diabetes space as well, because often we find because of this huge diversity, some of these voices are not represented as much when we think about nutrition guidelines or resources, kind of seeing the foods that you eat in your home and maybe not seeing those represented on social media. And so or even in your everyday today life, or even with your healthcare provider. And so this podcast really delves into that and finding ways where we can bring forward cultural eating and diabetes and talk about some strategies on how we can build those blood sugar friendly meals without having to change anything with your relationship with food. We want to make sure that this is something that aligns with your lifestyle. And so, Andrea, you mentioned some of those statistics. We know that these populations have a higher rate of diabetes and other chronic conditions, and South Asians seem to be one of the higher prevalence or at-risk groups with diabetes, with it being about 60% prevalence in that community. And so we'll chat a little bit about ways that we can even modify South Asian meals, for example. But I wish we had hours and hours to go through this because the diversity is huge and there is so much difference in foods that we're eating, even within, a South Asian eating pattern. So we'll touch on a few of those, and then maybe in future podcasts we can go through more as well. But I think this is a very, very important topic that we'll delve into.
Okay. So let's get it started. We often in other podcasts talk about kind of myths that we hear, but we also see myths around cultural foods and diabetes as well. So can both you, Matthew, and Roshni kind of speak to what are some common common myths?
Part of this could potentially come from maybe a gap in representation. We're just not talking about it as much, or even just some gaps in our knowledge and awareness of cultural foods and how do we fit those into a blood sugar friendly eating pattern. At the end of the day, I would say like all foods fit. So no matter kind of what the carbohydrate is, we can talk about, the nuances as we go through this podcast of like fiber and different, components of a food that impact how they are digested in the body. But at the end of the day, food is food, right? And so we want to make sure we're enjoying our meals, but we'll talk about strategies to balance those out. But that doesn't mean that, if your food seems to have more, or your dish, more carbohydrates, that it's bad per se. And, that language we want to be very mindful of because it can be very easy to kind of, put labels on certain foods. But at the end of the day, any meal can be balanced to be blood sugar friendly. And even if it is a carbohydrate heavy meal, there are some other things we can do for it to still fit with your care plan, whether that's, physical activity, stress management. At the end of the day, diabetes is not just, and you'll hear hear this theme as we talk about in other episodes too. It's not just the nutrition. It's this multi-dimensional puzzle that we're putting together, and we don't always have all the pieces perfect, and that's normal. We're all human beings, but how do we kind of get that balance between all the puzzles to make that picture fit with whatever matters for you? Yeah, Matthew, did you have any other thoughts around that? I know you work quite a lot with individuals with cultural eating plans and chronic disease management.
I think that a big piece of why there are some of these myths has to do with just some of the general resources that exist when it comes to diabetes, or even just general nutrition recommendations or handouts. People will see just a generic, like healthy plate type of thing that is on a handout. They will not see foods that they tend to eat normally, and they may think because of that they're like it just doesn't fit at all, or there isn't a way to make these things fit in, or they may feel that I will need to eat just these things that are on this handout, or some people may feel like if I go to an appointment that it will be just focused on just these foods in the picture. And I do think that that is on health authorities and providers for having the responsibility to use some more maybe culturally diverse or culturally relevant resources in these types of appointments so that people aren't fearful of, and we've probably all heard this from whether it could be clients, friends, family members who feel that if I go to an appointment like this, they'll just say that I need to stop eating all the things that I like, and that I need to just start eating all the things that are on this picture or this one more generic handout. But I think a big piece is recognizing that, yeah, cultural foods can fit, foods that are not seen as stereotypically healthy can fit. It's really a matter of how can we, like, how much of this can we fit in what portions can we fit this in what proportions in a meal can we fit this in. It's not about completely including or excluding certain foods. And since I also work in areas related more so to things like food allergies, I also like to often say that that is a case where we would literally say like you should not eat foods that have this thing, and we're working around complete removal of that from the diet. But with just about anything else, whether it be high blood pressure or diabetes or any other chronic disease, it's more a matter of proportions and how much of this can fit, where can it fit, not taking things out entirely unless you're allergic to it.
Okay. So the next kind of part, both of you kind of spoke on this piece of the misrepresentation, the guidelines, resources not being there to represent our population. Um, how do we, as either educators, dietitians, how do we integrate the cultural food preferences into guidelines without asking people to give up what they love? You both talked about, all cultural foods can fit. So how do we do that, or how can we support people yeah, without giving up things that they love?
One of the concepts sometimes we bring in here as educators as well is this concept of cultural humility, and just taking the time to understand, especially if it's an eating pattern that you maybe didn't grow up with or traditional foods that you're not familiar with. I always encourage fellow dietitians just to have that curiosity of saying, okay, this is a new food, and I think as dietitians we're always excited to learn more about how can we support our clients better and learn more about what we love to talk about, which is food. And so if we can really have that enthusiasm, that curiosity of looking into these eating patterns, and you know um, there's so much to learn, of course, and finding some of those I guess those knowledge keepers in those areas. So whether it's traditional diets in South Asian eating, it's maybe sitting down with someone that's following that pattern or has that knowledge around it, and finding ways we can integrate that into our practice. um, yeah, Matthew, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a really important piece is recognizing what are the larger minority cultural groups in your area. And it's not a matter of memorizing everything from every group that Andrea mentioned at the beginning, but maybe more so what is more relevant based on the community in which I am working, which which groups make up a higher amount of the population, where it would be vital to become more familiar with those types of diets. And also recognizing that although those foods might be a part of someone's diet, that may not be the case for everyone from that cultural group, and it may not be the case that that's like their everyday. It might be more of a mixed, more more mixed with more cultural foods, and some that are just more generalized in Canada, and it might lean one way more than the other. So recognizing the demographics in your own area, the foods that may be consumed in those more common cultures, but also recognizing that just because those foods are common, it doesn't mean that all of your clients from that group are going to be eating the same way or have the same concerns. It's about working with that individual while considering overall cultural context in your area.
Both of you brought up really important points, and I think too part of that curiosity is also asking, yeah, what does your day look like? What does your, kind of eating routine look like? Even timing of meals can be very different as well, or, the importance, or, where those meals are eaten or how they're celebrated. So it's really important to, yeah, ask that person sitting in front of you and learn from them and take that opportunity to, okay, how can I best help them as a clinician, or what best tools can we use? Um, let's go into this kind of piece. And I think this also comes up, we talk about constantly about, adapting dishes, and you hear that quite a bit in the diabetes world, right? Oh, now all of a sudden things need to be changed to manage blood sugars or whatever. But we also know that food represents so much more than that, just of, a health piece. It's more than that. It's tradition, it's cultural, it's, community, it's so many things. So how do we start adapting that for health without losing its meaning, or that kind of relationship component? Roshni, what do you think about that?
That's a wonderful question and a very common question. We hear often from clients of, whether that's a certain cultural significant social event that's happening. And then there's that hesitancy, that pause of like, but wait, I can't eat that. And that's where I really take that opportunity and create that space to say, why not? Right. So with any kind of meal, I feel like in the diabetes world too, we have this negative stigma around carbohydrates. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of carbohydrates today, but as much as it is has a negative outlook, I think carbohydrates need to be also talked about and how they're important for balancing our blood sugars. We need carbohydrates at every meal to keep those sugars nice and steady. And I think a lot of these traditional foods that might be richer in carbohydrates are also really great for supporting our blood sugars. So just kind of spinning that a little bit and taking another look at it. And like you mentioned, Andrea, it's not just about the nutrition. So if there is a meal that you find nourishing, it's really really important to enjoy that meal, and you don't have to modify it at a whole bunch. But maybe it's things that we look at that you're open to doing if you feel like you still want to stay on track with your blood sugar management. It might be, having a salad earlier in the day that's got some fiber in it, that's balancing those sugars leading up to your next meal. It could be going for a short walk if you enjoy walks, or, finding some movement that you enjoy and fitting that in after the meal that can also affect and those blood sugars and help them kind of stabilize after maybe a heavier carb meal. And so I think that's always a question of asking yourself, why not? And if you're hesitant, just speak with your dietitian. And kind of have a look at, what are some solutions, because there's always a way that we can make this fit, and it doesn't mean you have to, change your whole traditional meal. We always want to find meaning in your food, and allow it to fit in your routine.
When it comes to making modifications with the meals itself, I'd say that oftentimes it can be either, let's say, same ingredients, but maybe different proportions of them, so that we're overall having a higher fiber, lower glycemic index type of meal, or lower glycemic load type of meal, by changing how much of each thing we're adding in there. Still going to be those culturally relevant ingredients, still going to be things that we like, but maybe we just change proportions up a little bit. Another consideration is that if we are after, yeah, looking for more of like a certain type of flavor when it comes to things, knowing that that in itself is one that can largely stay the same. If we are using certain spices or certain seasoning, then that largely is not something that will need to change very much. Even if we are looking at some of the things we do generally look at changing when it comes to managing diet for diabetes or other chronic conditions. Seasoning does not mean it's super high sodium. Seasoning doesn't mean that it's going to be super, yeah, it's going to have a lot of things we're trying to avoid inherently. So that's another key consideration. And then one more consideration is as you are making modifications for some traditional dishes, whether it be proportions, whether it be changing how much salt is there, whether it be changing maybe the type of carbohydrate that's used, like the type of flour or the type of bread that's used in a certain dish, just if you try it and it's something you don't like, just being open about that. It's not a case where we have to just tolerate it for the sake of, like, I have to do this for because I have diabetes. If you truly just don't like the modifications, then let us know, and then we can just talk about what might be better alternatives or just ways that we can still make that fit in as is. You don't have to change things in a way that you hate. The goal is to make changes that are sustainable, still allow you to enjoy cultural foods, still like allow you to enjoy the tastes and textures and just how you feel when eating those foods. Don't have to overhaul everything in a way that you don't even like.
I think that's a really important piece, Matthew, to think about. And I know we've talked about before of like food is still meant to be enjoyable. So just because, you're navigating a diagnosis of diabetes, it doesn't mean you can't all of a sudden enjoy things or you can't have the things that you like anymore. That's, the whole piece about when we think about health, it's that it should be culturally appropriate, but it also should be enjoyable and enhance quality of life, no matter what pattern of eating that you are choosing. So, thinking about, yeah, how do I still enjoy this?
Something else I wanted to add is that some of the, again, with some of the groups we mentioned at the beginning, some of these cultural diets also have some strengths that we should consider. For some immigrant populations, it's going to be more common, for example, that they may have a more plant based diet. That's going to be something that is maybe more challenging for someone who grew up here or has a different cultural background, whereas in some populations, that's more so just the norm and does have some benefits when it comes to things like getting more fiber, avoiding some forms of saturated fat. So I think it's also important to consider uh, the starting strengths that kind of have that some of these diets are based on as well.
And Roshni, maybe you can add to that because you were kind of talking about that, not that like that carbohydrate quality, right? When we think about more plant based, that's what we're talking about, that carbohydrate load, that quality. So yeah, do you want to take that a little bit further of, yeah, some of the benefits that we would get from that too, the strengths?
Totally. I'm going to take a stab at that with an analogy. When we think about carbohydrates, think about it like you are putting fuel in your car. So, we're going to, for the sake of this analogy, think of our bodies as a car. When we think about the fuel type, we sort of have these three different types of fuel. So, we have the regular, sort of the normal kind of fuel, then you have your mid grade, and then you have the higher quality premium fuel. So, when we think about carbohydrates in the same way, we might find some carbs that are super easy to break down. Your body's not doing a lot of digestion and they're really easy to absorb. Those types of carbs can be helpful in some situations. So, let's say you're getting ready for some physical activity and you might want to take a quick snack, like a banana, for example, to provide those quick carbohydrates. Your mid grade, if you're a car, it's something that'll kind of last you for a little bit, but not too long. So it's something that will have a little bit more fiber versus a regular. So it could be something like, a fruit with a higher fiber. Matthew mentioned a concept called glycemic index, and I often talk about. It's kind of similar to fiber. To simplify it a bit, it's just how our body digests the food or the carbohydrate. And so foods with a lower glycemic index are going to be a little bit harder to digest versus foods with a higher glycemic index. They're going to cause our blood sugars to go higher and they're going to be easier to digest. And so I would say low glycemic index, high fiber is kind of what we're looking for when we want to have that premium or that really high quality fuel for our body. So this is something you would take at a breakfast, for example, that will last you a few hours until your next meal. And so we often recommend choosing from that mid grade or premium more often. But if you are looking for a quick boost, maybe in a snack, regular can do the trick to kind of get your blood sugars balanced. Um, it's a lot of words there, but I'm going to quickly jump into another idea. If you're finding, carbohydrates are tough because not everyone can, balance the carb side, and you're finding you want to start on the protein or the vegetables. That's another great way to boost fiber in your meal. Matthew touched on how a lot of our traditional diets might be naturally plant-based, and those sorts of foods like our beans, our pulses, they're a great source of both fiber and protein. So, kind of adding those into meals will be a great way where you're also managing your blood sugars, even if you might have like a mid grade or a regular type of carb fuel. That protein and that fiber from the vegetables will slow down how fast it's being digested. And that will really help to keep your blood sugar stable so that you're not running low as quickly. So that can be another way where we're kind of modifying the overall meal, so that you can still enjoy those carbohydrates that you love. So there's no, at the end of the day, no cookie cutter approach to this. It's just kind of finding what's accessible for you, foods that you enjoy, and coming up with those strategies that really fit with your lifestyle. And I could touch a little bit on timing as well. We kind of touched on like the composition, Andrea, but sometimes and we talk about this in another episode, is sort of the workplace or sort of your day-to-day life where timings can play a huge role in our blood sugars. And so, we want to recommend, the Diabetes Canada talks about having a carbohydrate rich meal with some protein and fiber every 3 to 4 hours. And of course, this might be slightly different depending on if you're taking medications or, your workplace. So again, no cookie cutter approach, but it's just important to kind of eat regularly, because usually around that 4 hour mark, we would start to see our blood sugars come down. And so having some sort of snack that has fiber rich carb and a protein can make a huge difference if, you're running late for your next meal, or you're a shift worker where, routine is a little bit different on your night shifts. Adding in that snack can really help keep you balanced throughout the day.
I love the car analogy and the gas analogy of figuring that out of and then it's not a cookie cutter approach. Everybody is going to, their eating has to make sense for them, and I think that's really important. It's going to look different for everybody, but those analogies kind of help guide a little bit, which is fantastic. So both of you touched on this, and I do want to point out, especially if you are listening, of kind of where to go, at least kind of a starting point for resources, tools, they're culturally relevant. Anytime that we have that kind of empowerment, then we really can have better conversations around our health, or when we're talking to clinicians or providers. So Matthew, I don't know if you have any resources, or Roshni, that you feel that our listeners, and we'll obviously attach them below as well. But yeah, does either of you want to list off a few good ones?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So a few resources that I'll mention are from Diabetes Canada, which is our national advocacy and educational organization for a lot of diabetes related things. They have some resources that are modified around certain cultural diets. So they have a diabetes and dining out webinar series, and some of the examples in there are more culturally tailored tips for when you're eating out, or for while managing diabetes while eating different cuisines. They also have a section on their site for general nutrition resources, but in there is also some sections based on things like handouts in different languages, handouts that are focused on different cultural diets. And while it's not going to be as plentiful and detailed as some of the more general resources that they have, there are still going to be some that are at least a good starting point when it comes to considering modifications you can make for culturally based diets. when trying to make things more in line with managing diabetes while still maintaining those flavors and those types of meals and ingredients that you're more used to.
Yeah, that's a super comprehensive list there, Matthew. We'll definitely link those in the podcast description here. So yeah, I'd second that. Diabetes Canada has some wonderful resources that kind of give you some insight on cultural meals. They're printed in different languages, which is nice. The other resource I was going to mention, Matthew touched on it. There are some meal patterns. So there's interactive tools on there. So if you're wanting to build out a meal pattern, which can be helpful if you're just wanting to see how do we put this into practice. We talked a little bit about protein and fiber and carbohydrates. It's a lot. So some of the tools on the Diabetes Canada website, as well as Dietitians of Canada, have sites like Cookspiration, where you can put in things like blood sugar, high fiber meals, and it'll give you those options on how we can kind of customize that so that it will be a fiber rich meal, for example, or protein rich and those kind of pieces. Um, so, we could go on with these resources, but I think that that's a great start. And always reach out to a dietitian in your community if you're looking for ways to find a plan that's flexible and aligns with your lifestyle. Don't feel like, again, there's a cookie cutter approach to this. I mentioned this a few times. We want to make sure that all foods fit, and we're finding a way to create a plan that you feel is honoring your cultural foods and your traditions, and you're enjoying your meals.
Matthew, to add in that is, when you are seeking a healthcare professional, whether, be a dietitian, is to ask those questions. Lots of dietitians, especially in diabetes, or not Diabetes Canada, Dietitians of Canada, dietitians that speak different languages are within your community. That's a great resource because not all dietitians are the same. So when you're looking for the best care, the best person to be able to have those great conversations, of even your care providers can be somebody to look for sure. Okay, so we're going to link all of those because both of you, yeah, some great resources to share for sure. But I wanted to thank both of you for having this conversation today. It's a part that, in the diabetes world, that's not really talked about. It's not really thought about as part of care, but it's such an important part of care. We talk about food all the time. Its importance, its relevance, its, traditions, it's all the things. It's not just nutrition for health. It's all the pieces. So for this segment, yeah, for Diabetes Month, I want to thank you both for engaging in this conversation. And of course, we always want to hear from you. So if there's pieces that you're interested in that you want us to talk about, as well as if you know somebody who would find this helpful, please share. Please, yeah, we want to hear from you. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this.